enterprises are going to spend, 20 to 30% more in their MarTech budgets this year and the year after. And yet utilization is actually going down. And the more I looked into it, it's really becoming this human issue. And leadership debt, as I've discovered, is a type of debt that manifests when you kick critical decisions down the road. I think where we're going in this world where AI-powered interfaces are more capable, more powerful than, say a year ago, you actually need people who are sensitive to the customer context. These aren't metrics that we should hang our head on anymore. I think we need to be 2 levels above that and talking at the management table around how a volume drives an outcome.
Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Saumitra Kalikar. The focus of today's conversation is MarTech Operations, something that sits at the intersection of marketing, data, and enterprise technologies. Now, in the last decade and so, marketing technologies have expanded significantly, evolving into a complex ecosystem which now includes customer data platforms, automation tools, analytical platforms, personalization engine, and a growing list of AI capabilities. But despite this heavy investment, some of the fundamental problems, such as establishing the leadership and operating capabilities, bridging the data silos, and delivering real business outcomes, these problems still persist. So to help me unpack these problems, I'm joined today by Jon Goh. Jon is the head of MarTech at Medibank in Australia. He has deep experience in marketing technologies, operations, and overall digital transformation landscape. So Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Saumitra. Look, really happy to be here. Love talking about this stuff.
Great. So some of the listeners might know Jon and I have worked together in the past. Jon, we are not cross paths for a while, but how are you doing, mate?
I'm pretty good. Navigating the world without Saumitra. I think, everything's changed, but not changed. So, we're just trying to find our way around this new world. Lots of trends coming into our domain and really kind of, been spending time trying to make sense of it all in the new year.
Great. So let's get started. So Jon, before we take a deep dive in our conversation, would you mind providing a brief overview about your background and experience in MarTech and what excites you to be in this space?
Well, and that's a great way to start because I'm not a traditional technology person by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a web content producer by background, and I just so happen to be the web content producer that fixed the website. And from there, I accidentally landed in this wonderful world of MarTech, which I've been in for the last 10 years. I think, I've had the good fortune of riding this wave of MarTech because when I started in MarTech, it wasn't even called MarTech. So I've had this real background in really kind of evolving my skill sets as the capabilities and as the integration into the business have grown over the last years. So it's been very interesting from the get-go because everything is new but not new. The fundamentals of customer relationship management or relating to customers or, getting the right message to the right customer at the right time. These are all fundamentals of marketing. So nothing has really changed in that regard. So the thing I've been really thinking about is how do we stay true to that goal and not really over-engineer or over-technologize things? Because the temptation is, Saumitra, as you know, there's so much technology available to end users now. You don't need a 100-person engineering room to do things for you. People can just buy this stuff off the shelf. So what are the team attributes and the leadership attributes required to drive genuine customer contact? And so, something that I'm obsessed with at the moment and really kind of deeply thinking about because I think the future is now and there's so many interesting things coming up in the pipeline that can make or break a customer experience.
So before we take a deep dive, I know you had actually submitted a paper a
Mm,
few months back, and you introduced some new concepts there around leadership data and etc. All those things, right?
yeah.
And I want to unpack those.
Yes.
But before we go there, uh, maybe you can provide a brief overview on your perspective on what does MarTech operation looks like. Um, because if from people who are outside marketing operations, they typically tend to look at MarTech as a lead generation function or a campaign
Mm,
generation
mm, mm.
campaigning function. And of course, there is more to that than that, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
maybe you can provide that
Yep.
view.
Yep.
What does modern MarTech operation
Yes.
looks like? What is its core scope and purpose?
Yes. Yes. That's a great intro into kind of, this paper I've written, because I think modern MarTech operations is engineering the customer experience, right? No longer are we just single point solution providers. Send an email, update the website, you know, look at lead gen lists. We encompass the total end-to-end system to be able to harness, capture, and manage customer data. So I think the customer data is at the core of what we do, because essentially we are orchestrators of the experience. And to be able to orchestrate that experience, I think it's really, really important to approach it from a operations mindset, because primarily what we are there to do is become the intermediaries between the tech team, the marketing team, and the customer experience. We sit at that middle, and we sit there and help the business achieve their customer experience objectives. So that's why an operations first mindset has to be taken. I think that's the key shift in MarTech as I've seen it in the last couple of years, from being kind of, single point solution providers, send email, update website, to now capture the data, get insights on the data, send the email, get customer feedback, insights loop back again. So it is this, end-to-end cycle now that MarTech practitioners find themselves sitting in. And so I think it's a really important and really, really now a truly appreciated part of a modern marketing team. Again, we were sitting on the edges before. Some of us weren't even in marketing. Now we're in the middle there, and we work very closely with the marketing operations traditionalists, because all those measurements, the media measurement, the marketing efficiency, the ROI calculator, that's all part of MarTech now. So like it or not, it's actually a very, very essential part, as I said, into this modern marketing engine. So that's why it's actually a really fascinating field, because there's so many different facets to it. You can look at data, you can look at ROI, you can look at performance, you can look at pure technology. All of these aspects need to be consolidated within within the same operational construct. Otherwise, the risk is you get fragmentation, you get, far too much wastage in spend, and you get people running around not knowing where they need to point.
So those points I do want to unpack further, like the technology debt,
Mm,
the proliferation of tools, etc. But
mm, mm,
let's focus on your paper a bit.
mm.
The paper I referred is titled "Thinking Beyond a Stack." That you
Yeah,
presented. It's a
yeah.
really good paper, and I will include the link to that paper,
Thank you.
John, when we publish this
Mm,
episode. But one idea that you mentioned in the paper is the whole idea that technology itself is not the biggest challenge but it's really the effective leadership, or what you
mm.
call as leadership debt. So would you mind unpacking that concept a bit for our audience, and
Yes,
how relevant, how it materializes in particularly in the MarTech operation?
yes, yeah. And I think it it came upon me, this concept, because I think I was exploring why enterprise transformations tend to fail or tend to blow their budgets. And especially in the MarTech world, where, all the hype is at the moment, right? Looking at some trends, enterprises are going to spend, 20 to 30 times, 20 to 30% more in their MarTech budgets this year and the year after. And yet utilization is actually going down. Fragmentation is happening, utilization is going down, and we're not getting the commensurate returns. Now, this is on average, not getting the commensurate returns to the investment. Organizations are spending more people are being hired to use the engines, and ROI is going down, engagement is going down. So what's happening there? So I looked into it and went, obviously it must be a operational or it must be a tooling issue, must be a setup issue. And the more I looked into it, it's really becoming this human issue. And leadership debt, as I've discovered, is a type of debt that manifests when you kick critical decisions down the road pertaining to people. It is exactly the same construct as tech debt. Tech debt, year on year, is a compounding debt that comes back to bite you when you finally do that data warehouse transformation. You finally do that CRM upgrade. All those deferred decisions come back and it has a human productivity and financial cost. Leadership debt is the same as that. It's no different. It is, however, human decisions that you then kick the can down the road and pay or not pay until much later. And it so the manifestation of it is chaos, dysfunction, and uncertainty within teams. And today, AI actually makes this worse. So if you think about leadership debt as a sort of a small spark, a little flame that goes, just burns silently in the background. AI is like a can of petrol you just tip on top of it because it just makes everything quicker. It makes everything faster. It makes everything more magnified. So we as leaders, as MarTech leaders, need to be able to be on top of it by building the most resilient, most challenging and safe, challenging in a safe way teams to be able to deal with the ambiguity of, this new world. And it fundamentally comes from not the tools, but the people. We need the people capability and resilience to be able to drive away this debt or pay down the debt early so that it doesn't compound in the future with you.
And I think it's a nice way to put it. And as you said, AI does amplify this much more than anything else, right? And the point that you have made also in the paper that organizations tend to invest in technology faster, but the accompanying organizational change that is required, leadership change, etc., that does not keep pace with that technology investment, right? And
Absolutely.
in your perspective, why that really is the case? Why organizations over and over, again and again, struggle to evolve their operating model, evolve their leadership to align with the evolving technology as well?
Look, I think the answer is really simple, right? And I think it's a gross simplification. However, the way I've looked at it is a lot of organizations tend to take a pre-internet operating model and try and jam it into an AI first era. In a pre-internet operating model, you look at a very static top-down hierarchy, where decisions need to flow up the chain, approvals need to go up and down before things get executed. And that's fine in the pre-internet or early internet world where, you kind of move at the speed of batch. But in organizations that move at real-time speed, augmented by AI insights, you need a very different operating model to be able to face into this world for users to actually adequately use the tools or leverage the technology that you've bought, because the technology is insanely capable. I think it's not because people are not capable. It's the way we work today needs to be radically relooked at for us to be able to embrace this new future. And I think there's a lot of ambiguity and a little bit of scariness that we need to face into when we're thinking about the kind of the MarTech team, MarTech operations of the future.
And the other point you highlighted in the paper, which resonated well with me, was the importance of culture and trust, where you have mentioned that the high-performing organizations are the ones where there is a lot of focus on experimentation and learning generally is encouraged. And that's a important, and it's not necessarily limited to marketing function only. It's a really cross-organization issue. But coming to MarTech in particularly, how important this issue is in the current environment?
Look, I think that's a great point, and you raise a really, that was my favorite part of the article, but also a favorite part of my research, because culture and trust is the fundamental unlock to a more dynamic, more trusting, and more powerful team. It's because what we're removing is the shackles of that kind of pre-internet thinking where, hierarchy is important. Hierarchy is actually the least of the importance now in this new world. It's trust and its ability for teams to work around a core concept of trust. And I refer to two authors in the book, Simon Sinek and Stanley McChrystal, who both write about trust, culture, and the power of the decentralized team. Because in this new world, you need to trust your decentralized teams to execute. Because my persona as the head of MarTech, I can't approve every single campaign that's in flight. I can't approve every single data schema that goes out. I have to trust my team leads and my technical leads to be able to do the right things in the right combination to deliver. We have to set those guardrails, however, and that's what I think leadership needs to do, is set the boundaries. Sinek talks about the circle of safety, the circle of trust. Leadership teams need to have that common language. Leadership teams need to be able to get around what is our core attributes in our team and then go ahead and own that. And again, simultaneously, Stanley McChrystal, he talks about the power of the decentralized team. You cannot be a monolithic team anymore. So decentralized teams need to work in concert, sometimes asynchronously, or a lot of the time asynchronously. But the unifying factor is trust and that culture of trust in, big teams, 50, 60, 90 people teams. If you can't have trust, I've seen it break down in a 2-person team. So you absolutely have to nail that. And that is the crux of how I think you should avoid, you avoid leadership there, is by taking a step back and building that culture before you scale.
Let's take our conversation further to more specifics of the operating model or operating structure within MarTech. And the point you made at the start is that the MarTech sits at the intersection. It works closely with overall marketing operation, but it also needs to work closely with data and analytics, privacy, potentially legal privacy, and overall technology functions, right? So what does it mean in that case in terms of the skills and capabilities required enough, to your point, to have a more autonomous MarTech function?
Yeah, and I think again, it comes back to that central theme of, kind of organizing operations, right? Because I think fundamentally, while you plan for decentralized teams or decentralized execution, and while, MarTech is an ecosystem of itself, I think that enterprise alignment is paramount. Marketing or marketing tech can't be a shadow IT function. In fact, I think that's the thing that we need to avoid at all costs, because that's another factor in leadership tech. You can't create another IT leadership team outside IT. You have to work with IT. So I certainly think that the MarTech team, the best and the most highest performing MarTech teams have a very clear remit. We're not trying to be IT. We're not trying to be data. We have to work, again, within the enterprise guardrails that we have a joint say in. We're not a passenger anymore in the enterprise. We work with our enterprise colleagues to get the frameworks that we can trust to then execute. We are the deliverers of the customer experience. And I think that's why work needs to be done in that operating model for people to understand that. And even for our C-suite, our CMOs, the CCOs of the world, they need to trust that we know our patch. So the CTO doesn't come, in a hypothetical situation to the CMO and going, "What are you guys doing? Why do you have your own IT help desk?" And it's happened before. I've seen that. And I certainly think that, again, organizing those boundaries and guardrails are super critical in this. And enterprise marketers can't sit behind marketing anymore. We can't just pretend our agencies run it all. In fact, we need to be out there in the wider enterprise, learning and sharing with our colleagues to be able to manage our patch.
And then just to be clear on some of the skills which are required within the MarTech operation, besides the core MarTech technologies, do you see having, let's say, a data engineer, a data steward, or some kind of technology architecture, SME, etc.? These skills are becoming more and more important to be part of a self-sufficient MarTech operation team?
So absolutely. So yes, I think inherently marketers and MarTech professionals need to know more about the underlying data. We need to know more about the underlying technology. So absolutely, it does help if you understand how data architecture works. It also does help if you understand how the underlying technology architecture works. But I think where we're going in this world where kind of AI powered interfaces are more capable, more powerful than, say a year ago, you actually need people to be able who are sensitive to the customer context. That is actually going to be the most primary skill set to come in. Instead of being more hands-on technical, you are actually more sensitive to the customer context with an underlying understanding of how the technology works. But you don't need to be skilled in SQL. You don't need to be skilled in HTML. Neither do you need to be able to draw relational databases. What you need to be able to do is work with a interface, work with an AI agent, and be able to ask the technology to do what you want in very human terms. Of course, with the full knowledge of what, can happen, the mechanics of what happens in the background, right? So it is a de-emphasis and a re-emphasis in someone's skill set. It's not a complete change. It's actually re-emphasizing, again, the truth, which is the customer.
Let's also discuss a little bit about another trend or a shift in marketing, which is AI-driven marketing, as AI is going everywhere within the organization.
Absolutely.
And MarTech is not immune to that.
Mm.
Um, we had this whole predictive analytics and propensity model based marketing, etc., for a few years now. Now the shift is in last 2 years there has been shift around Gen AI, right? That was a step, and now the on horizon we are seeing this whole agentic AI evolution, right? Where do you see in next maybe couple of years how MarTech should prepare themselves for this whole AI revolution?
Yeah, it's certainly top of mind at the moment because I'm actually going through this personal process of trying to figure out which, kind of agent co-pilot's the best for me. And I'm having this anxiety between ChatGPT and Claude, right? Like I've been using ChatGPT for so long now. I'm like, maybe I should try Claude. But then I feel really torn because I feel like ChatGPT is like my personal friend now. So
Yeah.
I think it's this weird conundrum that marketers will have because we're going to face into the same challenges, right? I think
Yeah.
marketing is actually going to be less technical and more conversational.
Mm.
So we will be relying on agents way more because the power of the agent is its ability to summarize vast streams of information. I don't need a specialist analyst to actually do very specific things for me now. I think the challenge for the marketer is to be able to straddle a multitude of ideas at the same time and then be able to work with AI to bring those ideas to kind of this consistency and extract the insights out of those. In past, you would have multiple teams of people doing that. Analysts, financial analysts, performance analysts. You would have your data analysts, all these people working for you to be able for you to then extrapolate ideas. Now, you don't have to do that anymore. And I think this is where the power of the new AI tools come because that all happens in the background for you. The challenge for you is to actually be able to articulate what it is you're trying to do, what it is you actually want to see, and then iterate on that. And I think that's a very subtle shift in kind of, cognitive skills, behavioral skills, but also then your technical skills, because your technical skills actually change. You don't need to write the code anymore, but you need to change your cognition to be able to talk about it in a way that an AI agent can understand. So it becomes a little bit more abstract, but I think it inherently becomes more human because in the days of hard-coded everything, you actually had to kind of check your humanity at the door because you had to write the code to satisfy the machine. Now, in a way, the machines have to satisfy you because the code is invisible. So I feel like there's this kind of just big shift in our mindset now that we can unlock or put away that kind of technical background and really focus on that human-powered outcome, which is, I think, scary and exciting at the same time because it is so simple. But with infinite potential of the blank screen, what do you want today, Saumitra? I want everything, but how do I say it? Becomes, very exciting for a lot of organizations.
Look, and one emerging use case in is now the agentic e-commerce,
Mm,
and this is about. And I want to get your perspective as to how MarTech should approach this, right?
mm,
Because
mm,
the unique characteristics of this use case are um, so John has his own personal AI agent, right? And John actually instructs his agent to
mm.
go and browse internet and then go for shopping, right? And then
Yep.
the commerce platforms, they will have their own agents as well, who they would
Yep.
right? So it's agent to agent communication that will happen. It's early days, but that's where the future is
Absolutely.
heading. But what it means from marketing perspective is that the organizations now to be ready for that use case, and then they
Mm,
might need to SEO optimize their content, etc., to basically tailor to these new types of
yes.
customers, right? Not
Yes.
human customers, but agent
Yes.
customers, right? How MarTech as an industry is approaching this new
Yeah.
evolution?
I'm glad you say SEO because I think we still need to take a traditional marketer's approach to this because it is a channel, it's just a channel. And SEO is the fundamental way to unlock this because SEO as a practice obviously is as old as search engines are. Since the dawn of search engines, people have been finding ways to game the search engine, right? So I think agentic commerce is the natural evolution of where we're going. However, the fundamentals of indexing for agentic commerce is still rooted in SEO. It's still rooted in customer experience. Yes, how people discover you and interact with your brand is going to be very different. Fundamentals remain the same. Do we have authority in the subject matter? Do we have a trusted source? Is your website got solid SEO foundations? Uh, you know, do you have credible links, backlinks, forward links, all of those things, all of those fundamentals still remain. So only when you can tick those hygiene boxes, then should you be starting to think about, okay, how do I index for agentic commerce? I think it's very easy to go from 0 to 1 million, but not kind of fill the gaps in between. So I think the way I've been thinking about this, agentic commerce is a huge opportunity to turbocharge your business. However, again, with leadership debt in mind, you must make sure you don't kick those the foundations down the road. Because if you don't address some of the underlying structural issues in your website or your content or your marketing, you are never going to index in a commerce engine. Because again, agents can detect those things now. Which I think one thing, and I suppose the one thing as a sort of side thought of this is we need to be mindful that we must make sure, well, we need to realize the difference between marketing to humans and marketing to machines. Because when, to your point, when agents reference other agents to show you what you want to see, there's that subtle chain of I'm actually doing things to please the machine versus doing things to please the human. So I think those two contexts are very distinct, complementary, but still very different. So when we think about our MarTech operations, we need to be able to divide and conquer those sort of roles, right? Who is actually in the process, which team is actually in the business of doing human things versus the teams that are actually optimizing for agentic outcomes.
Yeah.
Overlap in the teams, same team, but I think you need to draw those distinctions now because they're going to be slightly different.
Yeah, interesting times ahead. But I want to bring your focus back onto
Mm,
some of the realities and challenges in the large organizations when it comes to MarTech,
mm,
where historically many organizations have invested heavily in technologies, and if you look back now, their potential, most of the organizations have these challenges of duplicate, overlapping technology capabilities, etc. And there is potentially an opportunity for most of those big organizations to rationalize MarTech stack. right? How? What's your perspective as to how organizations should approach this to have a most efficient stack which has tools only for specific capabilities and there is no duplication?
I think consolidation is a really interesting theme for a lot of organizations, right? Because I think absolutely it's fraught with so many different angles, so many different views, political opinion, vendor opinion. So I think it is establishing that kind of common ground, that source of truth within an organization. And absolutely, I think technology ownership, technology risk management still needs to be owned by the IT function. I think the IT function, enterprise technology functions need to be front and center with this. However, I think the biggest change in my opinion would be marketing then coming to the table as an equal partner, because now marketing technologists are very heavily technology geared. We understand technology. We are specific domain experts within the broader enterprise mix. So I think to aid the centralization or the simplification of technology stacks, I think marketing technologists need to come to the table and be allowed to have their say. I don't need now an IT person helping me have my say, because I think, some of my team members could work in IT because they are that tech savvy and, understand the enterprise construct. And I think the onus is on us as MarTech people, with MarTech simplification in mind, is to also learn how the enterprise works. And I know a lot of MarTech people, a lot of marketers are guilty of not knowing these things just because we've been forced, to work in a certain way. But I think now we need to really come out from under the sheets a little bit and, interact more with our enterprise colleagues and learn about what their concerns are, what their needs are, and what their kind of operational constraints are. So that doesn't quite answer the question in a way, because I think MarTech is just part of the bigger whole. And I think what we need to do is probably bring or help educate our stakeholders on a more informed view when they're making technology decisions, because some of those outlier use cases might not be known by your big scale enterprise teams, because they're looking after your big CRMs, your big data warehouses, and MarTech or marketing is actually a very small part of those big monolithic systems. So I think it is that kind of education and be able to influence that view is a huge unlock to that simplification, because, I think to our earlier point, MarTech now is becoming a very significant spend for a lot of organizations. So it's almost like a cost that can't be ignored anymore. Whereas 10 years ago, it was kind of like, we just buy this email tool. Let's see how it goes, because it was really cheap. Now, you're looking at multi-million dollars worth of technology buy. It's not insignificant anymore. So I think the onus is on us, the MarTech teams, to be able to come and work with enterprise colleagues like you and I used to work, right, at that enterprise scale. And you're helping me appreciate the bigger picture of what I'm doing. I think that's the key. Each domain has to be at the table now.
Absolutely. I fully agree with that. Another practical challenge most of the businesses face is
Mm.
this constant issue about data silos,
Hmm.
right? I mean, there is organizations have so much data, but not many organizations effectively bring that data together to create true customer representations, product
Yeah.
representation, and so forth, right? So, and based on your experience, what why this is the case, why organizations keep struggling with this, and more importantly, how it keeps impacting MarTech operation.
Yeah, look, I think data silos come from, an operational issue, right? And I think it's no surprise. Everyone wants to hang on to their data. Everyone wants to do their own thing just because it makes operational sense in your little business unit.
Mm.
And I think data silos will be always something you need to deal with as a bit of operational ambiguity. And I think one thing as well to note about data silos is, while the technology exists to unify data, we might not have the privacy and permissions or the consent available to consolidated data. So I think it's probably one thing to be mindful about is what permission states or consent states do those data points live in? Because that's probably the biggest blocker to consolidation, because technically you can do all of it. However, I think ethically is certainly something that we need to think about, especially, and this is where it comes to MarTech people, right? I think as MarTech practitioners, we not only need to understand how a customer experience works, but we also need to understand what are the underlying privacy and consent states from our data that drive the customer experience. So I think thinking about data silos as MarTech people, it is an operational constraint. And I don't think it's certainly for us to get involved in, in much detail. I think we use that as a constraint. Yes, we can provide a view to, data teams or, CDOs around the place to be able to give the requirements for marketing. But I don't necessarily think it is one for us to solve on our own. I think
Mm,
in terms of maximizing the use of the data that's available to you, I think this is where modern MarTech tools have maybe surprise enterprise capability.
mm,
Thinking about things like, a Snowflake or a Salesforce Data Cloud or, even a Pego, tools like that have advanced decisioning capabilities. I think those things become quite interesting when you apply it, against a data warehouse context, right? So I think that's where where the MarTech folk can start thinking about innovative ways, but to harness what available data is to them. Because I
mm,
think if you think the objective is consolidation of data, it shouldn't be, because consolidation data is means to an end. I think it is harnessing what data is available to you and applying logic, smarts, and insights to it to derive something. That's what we should be doing. And I think this is certainly where MarTech people need to be start orientating is what insights can we derive from the data we have today? And I guarantee you, most people, and not because people don't have the capability, but most people aren't even thinking about that, because I think we're operationally crunched. We've got to get the campaign out faster. We've got to get him out more. But I think what we need to do is also step back and go, okay, what are the insights from the data we have today telling us? I think even in that little realm, there's more than enough to go off. So I think it is keeping a realistic lens on it, because we can't say, oh, all marketing stops till we get a CDP. Well, that's not happening. Or if I don't have a single view of the customer, it's not worth doing proper marketing. It's iterative. These things just go around in circles forever. And if you wait for the perfect solution, I think, we're setting ourselves up for our failures.
So, John, I wanted to get your perspective on another important topic, which is risk governance and ethical
Mm,
consideration. And you
yeah.
started talking about that anyway. Um, but as this whole privacy regulations become more and more stringent, certainly within Australia and rest of the world as well,
Mm.
um, how do you think, what should be the role of MarTech in terms of uh, being very compliant to those regulations? I mean, do they need to have skills within the marketing operations, or do they need to work closely with privacy teams and other teams within the organization?
Mm. Oh, I think both, right? I think, yeah, absolutely. I think privacy and consent are the backbone of marketing, because we have to be. We can't do marketing unless you have consent to do marketing. So I certainly think in this evolving space, we need to have both. We need to have those skills within the marketing group, and we need to work with our colleagues in privacy and legal to be able to uh, get the right advice, to be able to build the right structures so that you can drive safe and ethical marketing. And by safe and ethical marketing, you have meaning, you have to have the right opt in, opt out, you have to write preference structure, all those sort of mechanics need to be built in, uh, and certainly stringently guarded, because that, speaking of trust, that is the soul of trust with our customer. We cannot breach that trust. So we need to be absolutely in lockstep with the current practices, and marketers now need to be completely abreast with those things, and help legal, because legal is a very constrained resource.
And seems the case with AI governance.
Mm,
As the AI becomes more and more central to marketing operation in terms of some decision making, or also some of the marketing activity execution, uh, how do you see AI governance should be played out in the marketing operation?
So again, working in lockstep with our colleagues in the enterprise, right? AI governance is a very important role now in the business. it is as important as data, as important as legal. It is going to be even more important because of those advances. So I think it is that cross uh, cross enterprise collaboration, one thing, and the other thing is also then understanding in the marketing teams that AI is not something you can just turn on. You have to understand what guardrails are applied to AI and what we can safely use within a business. Just because it's available to you doesn't mean you should use it. So I think a lot of businesses, and certainly some of the um, people I've been talking to externally, they've have these discussions internally about how do we um, how do we best get our head around these new and emerging things. And I think this is where AI governance comes in, right? There's people specialized in organizations now. It's their sole job to think about these things. So I certainly think it's, you know, we as marketers don't have to be the AI experts. We just need to know how it works. We need to work with other people in the organization who are who can help us navigate these worlds, because there's so many things that we don't know are out there that can absolutely trip up any organization.
I think we are almost there towards the
Mm,
closing sections. But one thing I want to unpack with you, John, is about how the success for MarTech operations should be measured.
mm, mm,
Um, what I mean by that is, yes, there are some typical traditional metrics MarTech might be, operations might be applying, like
mm.
number of campaigns executed,
Yes, yes.
number of leads captured, etc. But those are very activity metrics. Of course, when you would surely agree, when you talk to leadership, that's not how they want to measure the outcome. They would like to measure the outcome in terms of contribution to revenue generation,
Hmm.
contribution to and lapse reduction, and so on and so forth, right? So
Yes.
how a MarTech should demonstrate its value in terms by what kind of success measures they should be
Yep.
capturing to demonstrate the
Yep.
value?
Yep. Absolutely. Contribution to financial outcomes, right? We cannot be
Mm,
a volume or to your point, activity based function. That is just not the way of doing. Yes, it provides an indicative sizing of contribution. Absolutely. You can talk about volume. You can talk about number of campaigns. However, I think those are lead indicators. I think we really need to anchor MarTech around contribution to financial KPIs, because we absolutely help power bottom line. We also need to look at MarTech's contribution to things like CSAT, NPS, all of those customer level measures, because again, we are engineering those. So I think the kind of leading MarTech practices I've seen have clear financial KPIs, have clear customer satisfaction KPIs, and have people within those teams who can help navigate those and understand how we can untangle kind of, multi-silo, multi-channel attribution. So the ask of the modern MarTech professional is significant. I think it's a big change in the last couple of years to then how many campaigns did you kick out this week, or what's the click-through rate? What's the open rate? These aren't metrics that we should hang our head on anymore. I think we need to be two levels above that and talking at the management table around how, and, a volume drives an outcome. So we can then talk about it as, the MarTech engine room, going back to the orchestration of MarTech capabilities. We're not just email providers. We are email, web, we're personalization, we do all of that. So how does that working in concert drive financial impact? How does that drive customer satisfaction? I think that's where mature MarTech leaders need to be going.
yeah. Okay. Look, as we wrap up our conversation, John, maybe if you before we close off, if
Mm.
you want to share one piece of advice to MarTech executives or senior executives in general, uh, what would that be? What is one piece of advice that is very relevant
Mm.
given where we are in the MarTech current state of affairs?
I think it's to stay curious, because it's an ever evolving field, right? Stay curious and keep talking to people, because that's how I got my head start into MarTech. I didn't know anything when I started, but I think the one thing I managed to do is just talk to people, hang out with people and understand what their business contexts are. And, talk to the vendors. Don't be shy of don't be scared of talking to vendors. Vendors have a point to, have something to tell you. You don't have to buy it, but they're certainly worth an input because I think all of us together make this community. So if we're powered by curiosity, we're going to be a much stronger community.
Yeah. On that note, John,
Cool.
thank you for your time. It was really a practical insight. And as I said, I will include the link to your paper in
Thank
the
you.
my lab of this episode.
Yes.
It was a
Awesome.
pleasure hosting you.
Lovely to chat.
Thank you. If you found this discussion valuable, please follow and subscribe to Enterprise Tech Talk. And thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.